In the 1950s, Lesotho was still a British colony, under its king, Moshoeshoe II, and despite how rural and undeveloped his little nation was, his people, the Basotho, were proud. They'd never been conquered by another tribe, and they had defeated the Europeans in battle, and had successfully played them off each other to retain their autonomy. The Basotho had gone from a tribe of 4,000 in the deep Lesotho mountains to a kingdom that stretched from the Drakensberg in the east and deep into the Free State in the west. Lesotho wasn't a colony like other conquered nations in Africa, but instead was a protectorate of Britain. 20,000 Basothos had volunteered to fight for Britain in World War II. But by the 1950s, there was a growing independence movement that was growing out of the small nation's increasing middle class. And in 1952, the Basotho Land Congress Party was formed. This socialist and Pan-Africanist party was campaigning on a heavy anti-colonialist platform. Its co-founder, Potlako Lebalo, would later go on to be a prominent figure and co-founder of the South African Pan-Africanist Congress, a party that the BCP would have a really close relationship with. And in the 50s, it became clear that independence from Britain was inevitable, and the BCP seemed to be the only cohesive and organized political force in the country. And as the 50s drew on, it started to gain momentum. And when it became clear that Lesotho's future would be decided by elections, the conservative elements in the country began to worry about this radical party. They responded by organizing themselves. This culminated in the formation of the Basotho National Party. The BNP was backed by conservative and traditionally minded Basothos who were concerned about the BCP's supposed lack of respect for tribal chiefs, the church, and even some assumed the king. So, it was no surprise when the lesser chiefs and Roman Catholic Church chose to support the BNP. The rivalry between these two parties would dominate Lesotho's history for the rest of the 20th century. Lesotho's first election was scheduled for 1965, and with the prospect of independence the next year, it made winning this election even more important. The 1965 election was close, the BNP taking 42% of the vote, the Basotho Land Congress Party taking 40%, and the monarchist MFP taking 16%. But due to Lesotho's electoral system, the proportion did not transfer into seats in parliament. The BNP was awarded 31 out of Lesotho's 60 seats, giving them a majority. The BNP was victorious, and Chief Lebowa Jonathan became Prime Minister. The next year, the British Protectorate of Basotholand became the independent country of Lesotho. Lesotho was in a very difficult situation. It had few natural resources, an extremely poor and unemployed populace, and an economy completely dependent on South Africa. There was little Basothos could do to improve their situation. Their only real option was to find work in South Africa, which many did, mostly as migrant laborers working on South Africa's mines. In the late 60s, the BCP started rarely campaigning, and many Basothos working in South Africa were influenced by the BCP's sister organization, the Pan-Africanist Congress. And Prime Minister Lebowa was facing pressure from apartheid South Africa. The Basotho Congress Party was gaining popularity, and it was starting to radicalize the rural populace. Lebowa and the traditionalists and conservatives that backed him began to prepare a countermeasure. In January 1970, Lesotho was having its next election, but as the results started coming in, things weren't looking good for the BNP. It looked like the Basotho Congress Party was going to win. On the 30th of January, Chief Lebowa declared a state of emergency, dissolved parliament, suspended the constitution, and declared the election invalid. Chief Lebowa Jonathan was now a dictator of a BNP-led one-party state. Although the results were never officially released, it was said the BCP was 8% ahead of the BNP, and the seats allocated would have given them a serious majority. Lebowa's coup was a risk, but he did enjoy the support of apartheid South Africa, which was very concerned about the BCP's connection to the South African Pan-Africanist Congress. But the Basotho National Party was now in a tenuous position. It had seized power through force, but did they have the means to retain it? Worse was when King Mashoshu II reacted with disapproval to the coup. Jonathan exiled him, claiming that he had voluntarily abdicated. The BNP, now out of necessity, began immediately consolidating its power. They staffed the civil service and Lesotho's paramilitary-like police force with BNP supporters. Lesotho had no army, so the fact that the only armed force in the country, the police, were now staffed with very traditional conservative Catholics, more loyal to their chiefs and church than to democracy and even the king. It meant that as long as Chief Lebowa had their support, they would support him. And as long as he stayed on South Africa's good side, Lesotho's economy would survive. King Mashoshu would later return to Lesotho, legitimizing the BNP's regime. The Basotho Congress Party was now locked out of power and unable to campaign, decided to follow Lebowa's example and attempt a coup of their own. In 1974, various police stations and government buildings were attacked. The BCP attempted to provoke a general uprising with their sporadic attacks, but with the police and civil service staffed with BNP supporters, a coup never took place. The attacks went nowhere, and the BNP responded with a massive crackdown. Suspected communists and BCP supporters were hunted down and arrested and killed, but some were able to escape, including the party's leader, Ntsu Mokehle, who fled the country. Chief Jonathan had won, but by the next year, Lesotho's economy had collapsed. But thanks to aid from South Africa, and with the political situation stabilizing, the economy started to recover, with an 11% GDP growth in 1976. Though in 1976, the Soweto uprising occurred in South Africa, and thousands of black South Africans fled the country to join the ANC, and some, the PAC. The PAC's armed wing, APLA, received 178 Basotho migrant miners. Podlako Lebalo, one of the co-founders of the BCP back in 1952, was now a prominent leader in the PAC and was happy to take them in. The BCP in exile formed their own armed wing, the Lesotho Liberation Army, or LLA, and these 178 Basotho migrant miners made up the basis for the BCP's new armed wing. The LLA would grow in number over the years, and in 1978, the first attacks on Lesotho soil began.